Jason Gorber from thatshelf.com. We're here at the Cannes International Film Festival in the midst of the regular levels of chaos that sort of show up here at the festival. This is day 1075, I don't even remember. But we're here to talk about a film that I've been waiting for many years. Brett Morgen's David Bowie documentary, experience, cinematic orgasm called MOONAGE DAYDREAM. Did a written review at POV Magazine. Please support POV Magazine. They're supporting me being here and covering documentaries for them is one of the pleasures of my life. So definitely be sure to check out POV Magazine both online and actually subscribe. So just a shout out to them. Brett Morgen's a remarkable filmmaker. I think one of the most accomplished and perhaps in a funny way underappreciated documentarians working today, if that's at all possible. He had a world premiere here at Cannes. And yet, if you look at the sort of way that his work has been so transformative, so remarkable, in so many different iterations. He's worked on Rolling Stones docs. He did an incredible thing for 30 for 30, the ESPN documentary series on OJ. If you haven't seen that, it's an amazing assemblage of news reports. Very, very specific, very experimental, and a real amazing way of actually articulating sort of the media frenzy around the Bronco chase. Perhaps his two most famous films of late, are Montage of Heck, the Kurt Cobain doc, and Jane, about Jane Goodall. Two films that employed tons of archive footage, interview concepts, in the case of Kurt, obviously contemporaneous, and some contemporary. Jane, new interviews with her, new found footage. And his latest is this David Bowie project, which is an authorized David Bowie film. In other words, he had access to the entire archive. He had access to the music, he had access to the multi-tracks. He had the ability to tell the story of David Bowie in a way that David Bowie would have wanted his story to be told. And some people will be very cynical about that. Some people will say, well, all he's doing is essentially a giant commercial for David Bowie. There are worse things in the world. What's kind of amazing is he's done something a little bit more sublime than that. He's actually made a film which is an extension of David Bowie's art. He has facilitated David Bowie, even after his passing, to continue to communicate, to elucidate, to present his music in different ways, and to continue his artistic goal, namely to get to have the expressions over a decades-long career actually seen by more contemporary audiences. Now, the film itself runs 2 hours 20 minutes. I will say this right now as I'm sitting here staring into a phone. This is not a movie to watch on your phone. It's not a movie to watch at home. If you can find time and opportunity, and I would love for it to be a regular basis, I think it should be scheduled in the syllabus of schools all over the world, see it in IMAX. This is a film of true cinematic proportion, and so often, especially with documentary, things are designed to focus on the subject, not on the form, not on the craft. And this is a visually stunning, impeccable dive into the vast imagery, the experimental video work, the animated elements that Brett incorporates, the stock imagery, the use of music videos seen from different angles and B-roll and all the other elements and details, the way that it all comes together, the incredible cacophonous soundtrack that somehow allows moments of exquisite precision where you're pulling out small moments from musical performance and actually seeing them sort of illuminated underscoring lines of interview dialogue. It's remarkable, and it's not going to be for everyone. It's not even going to be for every Bowie fan. It's probably going to be a better film if you're not such a Bowie fan, because it's going to introduce you to a sense of Bowie, a sense of the Starman, a sense of the Thin White Duke, a sense of what was at play here when he was constantly changing, constantly pushing the envelope. I think there's a lot of kids, youngins, who, you know a couple tracks and know this, but they don't understand the sort of explosive nature that occurred in the early 1970s with the eruption of David Bowie, the not only the tracks that he did, the tracks that he produced, the cities that he championed in a funny way for production, it's all there. But this is not just the greatest hits of, you know, the Ziggy period. We definitely see, I mean, it starts, I believe, with a track from Heathen, and it sort of goes back and forth from there. This is not somebody who sort of did a bunch of stuff and then rested on their laurels. They were constantly pushing. And right until his final moments with Black Star, sort of a mix between an album and a theatrical experience, Bowie was constantly challenging. What the film isn't, it's a straight up biopic. What the film isn't is an introduction, if you know nothing about the guy, to actually see who he was, where he was born. It's sort of there, but it does a very bad job of that. In fact, I will say if I have one very specific criticism, there's about 2 minutes of the film I would take out. I understand why it's there for lots of reasons, both aesthetic and political, is that Brett has spent the entire film focusing entirely on Bowie's vision of Bowie. Of David Jones's own vision of who he became with David Bowie. Rocket Man in a funny way did that with Elton John, and he had the opportunity to actually showcase how we went from Reg to Elton. But David Bowie was always saying stuff and doing stuff slightly differently. He was an exquisite communicator, and if you actually bought into his hype entirely, it sort of underscored the stuff that was actually deserving of hype, if that makes any sense. He was constantly talking about being so experimental and all this, and then the songs would end up just being great. They're straight up rock and roll. You listen to Heroes and you don't think, wow, this is done from some sort of transcendently new recording experience in a different place. It sounds like what rock and roll should sound like. And in some ways the reason for that is because rock and roll changed because of albums like that. That we simply accepted that that's the way that the music was always meant to be. But I will say the segment where we finally get a little bit of the sort of biographical, behind-the-scenes personal stuff, him falling in love with Aman, that at that moment, the film just reminds us of what's not in here. It's nothing about his first marriage, it's nothing about his kid, Duncan, kids there. It has nothing about, you know, the travails of his childhood, his relation, a little bit about the relationship with his parents that sort of comes in through interview. That's a little bit there, but that's, again, all that stuff is done through David's voice. Yes, he's talking about his wife, but he's talking about his wife at a very specific time. He doesn't do what he does, David doesn't do what he does in the rest of the film, is like talk warmly. I assume when he married his first wife, he also felt the same way, or at least similar way, and then didn't. And it's just like all those moments of contradictions and all those moments that actually sort of take place where you're gifted Bowie having such a long career, that he says stuff and then says something else that completely contradicts it. He justifies at every mode of his career what he's actually doing, as one does in interviews. This is kind of how it works. But the film plays with that, and that's what I love. I love that there's that even David Bowie himself is not a narrator that you can always, he's not a reliable narrator. But what is reliable about this is falling into the music, and visually what he does, I mean, the closest thing I can think of, and there's absolute visual echoes to it, is the ending of 2001. It's literally designed as this fever dream, as this crazy sort of obliteration of different segments into these shards of material that sort of coalesce into these sort of celestial orbs of cinematic awesomeness. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but basically what you have is something that's trippy as shit. There's a psychedelic nature to the way that it plays out, which is really intoxicating. I bet a lot of people will be on substances in order to fully get what they believe that they need to out of the film. As somebody who was entirely sober, entirely awake at a midnight screening, I had nothing in front of me but the giant screen of the Lumiere and the massive sound system that's on the Grand Lumiere. I was just transported. It was just beautiful to hear the songs, to see the stuff. And sometimes it's beautiful in the simple moments when you actually have beautifully restored clips from D.A. Pennebaker's exquisite Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars concert doc, one of the great concert movies of all time. But you have these exceptional live performances. You have a couple key songs that show up. Space Oddity is given appropriate prominence. But other than that, you're not getting sort of like a musical sort of journey through his career in, you know, temporally consistent way. You're bouncing back and forth. You're seeing the stuff. You're feeling the ride. You're feeling the intensity of fandom. There's some amazing vintage sequences from the Live in Brixton era of the young kids completely transformed and transported by Bowie, who was, you know, at that time breaking down barriers in a way that I think is again, we totally take for granted now. Yes, it was theatrical. Yes, it employed these kabuki elements. But for me, the most sort of resonant, the most redolent sequences I also wrote about. It's funny, you have, as I'm sitting here holding this stick in front of me, it's Bowie in a mask. You actually see him do a life cast to get a mask. And you can see, for a moment beyond the facade, is when the mask is there and you just know, you can see his tension, you can see his muscles tensing, it's just his nostrils are open. When they finally take it off, you can see a moment of panic. You can see a moment of lack of control. It's the only time in the film, I think, that you actually see that he's not in charge and that he needs some cloth to wipe his eyes. And you can actually feel for a moment a real anxiety, a humanity there, which is not there really in everything else. He's so cold and so calculated and so beautifully prismatic to our own things that we are putting upon him. So angular, so exquisite. God, the guy looked good in the suit. But it's that moment that I saw vulnerability. It's that moment that I saw somebody who, you know, you can be a bazillionaire, but it still fucking sucks to have a face cast made. And then, again, with a stick, he does the putting the mask in front of his face thing. You know, you have like a mask, but it's like a foot away from his face, and from the stage, you would just see the mask. But we're seeing it from an angle, so we're seeing the mask. We all know it's a mask, of course, but it's not actually affixed to his face. It's held out in front, so we can see the mechanism, we can see the distance. We can see that he wants us to see that he's holding a mask. And that's kind of what this film does. This film encourages us in the best possible way to dive deeply into the world of Bowie, to simply embrace everything that Bowie actually experienced, to actually do his thing, to actually make it happen. Now, coincidentally, as I'm walking through here, I'm in the middle of a video. I've never done this before. This is Thomas. I'm literally doing MOONAGE DAYDREAM right now, and I'm talking about my favorite moment being the moment with the mask, and that by showing the mask and showing the stick, you are both seeing the man behind the mask and also the artificiality of it. You, who's even a bigger Bowie fan than me, in some ways. Yeah. How did you respond to the film?
Catching me off guard here. Well, I thought it was pretty awesome. I mean, when it hits, it really hits. I love the fact that it was so incredibly loud. I wish every screening would be like that. I mean, it's like Ziggy Stardust says on the back to be played at maximum volume, and he took it to heart. So I thought that was amazing. You just even more than listening to the music, you can feel the music. So things like this totally sensory overload idea, I thought was amazing. Of course, what you just talked about, the idea with the masks playing roles, how you become the role, how the role shapes who you really are. I thought, I mean, those were really interesting topics in there. I had some problems. I felt there was some repetition in there, in that how he's used some images that kept popping up throughout, kind of like made it feel less inventive than it maybe could have. At the same time, I like the idea of the whole thing being a big collage, that he did not do chronology, that he did not give you like background info, like no talking heads, that it's just like the Bowie experience. So I thought it was, in hindsight, I thought it was pretty great, but probably you could just fine-tune it a little more.
And here we are. This is exactly the conversations that we have at Cannes, and the way that this is it. You've now experienced the Cannes Film Festival moment, running into a dear friend who articulated in 2 minutes what I could absolutely have been taking about 20 minutes to do. But this is it. absolutely, there's a couple moments that I think could probably be truncated. That goes with say. It is at 2 hours 20 minutes. It's going to be a slog even for those that are already committed for it. But I didn't care. I was just there. I was there for the ride. I was there to absolutely apprehend every single moment as it played out, to embrace what was there and to be taken along for the ride. As I said, it's a celestial ride. It's the voyage of the Starman. It's us absolutely finding it, and I really think that MOONAGE DAYDREAM is a film that we will cherish. And as Thomas said, it's got to be played really fucking loud. It's got to be seen on the biggest screen you can, however you can, whatever you have to do, Bowie fan or not, just fan of cinema. Take the time, be there, be prepared for MOONAGE DAYDREAM, the latest terrific work from one of the great documentarians of all time, Rob Morgan. For thatshelf.com, I'm Jason Gorba. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe, follow us on social media. We will see you next video. All the best. Take care.